They thought they ended my career with a single vote and a fabricated performance review. What they failed to realize was that their victory automatically armed the bomb I had been wiring for 8 weeks. By the time the board finished applauding the CEO, our lenders were dialing in, the SEC file was warming up, and the only person unemployed in that room was about to be him, not me. My name is Eva Hayes, and I am 42 years old. I am the Vice President of Risk Management for Harborline DataWorks, and if you are listening to this story, hoping for a heartwarming tale about forgiveness, you are on the wrong channel. This is Chicago in February. The wind coming off the lake this morning is not just cold, it is personal. It feels like a razor blade sliding across your cheekbones, which is fitting because that is exactly what the corporate atmosphere inside the glass tower ahead of me feels like on a good day. Today is not going to be a good day. I tighten my scarf and march toward the revolving doors of the Harborline building. My breath puffed out in short white clouds. I love this weather. It wakes you up. It kills off the weak bacteria and apparently keeps the tourists away. I checked my watch. It was 7:45 in the morning. I was early. I am always early. In my line of work, being late is a risk, and I do not tolerate unnecessary risks. I have spent 20 years building a reputation as the person who sees the iceberg before the ship even leaves the harbor. I bypassed the main lobby security with a nod to the guard. The elevator whisked me up to the staging floor. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp on the 52nd floor. But I like to be in the adjacent prep room by 8. I had been rehearsing my presentation on strategic risk for 3 weeks. The file was already open on my tablet. My thumb ghosted over the clicker in my pocket like a gunslinger checking the safety on a revolver. I had slides prepared that showed a 15% increase in unsecured vendor debt. It was dry, boring stuff to the uninitiated, but to a board of directors, it was the difference between a profitable quarter and a shareholder lawsuit. I was just pouring my second cup of black coffee when I heard it. A knock. It was not a confident knock. It was a hesitant, rhythmic tapping like a bird flying into a window pane. I call this the knock of trouble. Good news walks in. Bad news hesitates. "Come in," I said without turning around. The door creaked open. It was Noah Pierce. He is a junior analyst in my department. Bright kid, 24 years old, still thinks the corporate ladder is made of merit and hard work. He looked terrible. His skin was the color of wet parchment, and he was holding a red envelope against his chest like it was a shield. The envelope had the word "Confidential" stamped across it in black block letters. "Noah," I said, turning to lean against the mahogany desk. "You look like you have seen a ghost, or worse, the quarterly audit report. What do you have there?" He could not meet my eyes. He stared at his shoes. "Eva, I am so sorry. Mr. Cole made me do it. He said I had to give this to you before you went up. Mr. Cole, Damian Cole, our CEO, the man who wears $3,000 suits and thinks compliance laws are just suggestions for poor people." I walked over and gently took the envelope from Noah's shaking hands. His fingers were cold. I ripped the seal open. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper. It was a notice of termination of employment, effective immediately. I read it once, then I read it again. I did not feel angry. I felt a cold, clinical detachment. It was the same feeling I get when I spot a discrepancy in a spreadsheet. I scanned the bottom of the page. There was a signature there claiming to be mine, acknowledging receipt, and waiving my right to a hearing. I let out a short, dry laugh. Noah looked up, startled. "You are laughing. Come here, Noah. Look at this," I said, pointing to the bottom of the page. "If you are going to stab someone in the back, you should at least do your homework. Look at that signature." He squinted at the paper. "It says Eva K. Hayes." "Exactly," I said. "My middle name is Marie. I have never signed a document with a K in my life. And look at the loop on the Y. I loop left. This person looped right. This is a forgery, Noah, and a lazy one at that." Noah looked like he was going to be sick. "Damian told me you were done. He said you do not have the authority to go to the 52nd floor anymore. He said security has already been updated. Eva, he threatened to fire me if I did not deliver this. I have student loans." I did not know what to do. I patted him on the shoulder. It was not a comforting pat. It was a bracing one. Calm down. You did your job. Now watch me do mine. I picked up my leather portfolio and walked out of the prep room toward the elevator bank. Noah scrambled after me. "Eva, you cannot go up there," he whispered frantically. "He said you are banned." I ignored him and pressed the call button. Nothing happened. I pulled out my security badge and tapped it against the reader. Usually it gives a cheerful little beep and a green light. Today it gave a harsh mechanical buzz and a solid red light. Access. Denied. The small LCD screen read. I tried it again just to be scientific about it. Buzz? Red light? Well, I said, turning to Noah, who was practically hyperventilating. It seems Damien was not bluffing about the electronics. He really thinks locking a door is enough to stop a risk assessment. I looked at the stainless steel doors of the elevator. They reflected my distorted image. A woman in a charcoal suit who had just been fired 5 minutes before the most important meeting of the year. Most people would be crying right now. Most people would be calling their lawyer or packing a box of personal belongings. I am not most people. I turned to the heavy door marked Emergency Exit. "Eva, what are you doing?" Noah asked, his voice squeaking. "The elevator might be fired?" "Noah?" I said, pushing the heavy bar on the door, but my legs are still employed. I shoved the door open, revealing the concrete stairwell. It smelled of dust and unconditioned air. We were on the 48th floor. The boardroom was on the 52nd, 4 flights, 80 steps. I started climbing. My heels clicked rhythmically on the concrete. It echoed like a metronome. Noah hesitated for a second, and then I heard the door catch and his hurried footsteps behind me. As I climbed, I felt the adrenaline kick in. It was not fear, it was fuel. I adjusted my grip on my portfolio. I imagined a camera floating right in front of me, hovering over the railing. I want you to picture this with me. I am walking up a cold industrial stairwell in 4-inch heels. My breath is steady. My mind is clear. If you are listening to this while you are sitting in traffic or pretending to work, comment below with what state you are in. Seriously, pause and do it. Because if you are in Florida or Texas or somewhere warm, and you are complaining about the air conditioning being too cold, I want you to know that I'm currently climbing toward a hostile takeover in a Chicago winter, and I have zero sympathy for you. I rounded the landing of the 49th floor. Noah was panting behind me. "Eva," he gasped. "Why are you not screaming? They just fired you." I did not break my stride. I kept my eyes on the steps, counting them. 19, 20. "They did not fire me, Noah," I said over my shoulder. "They just unlocked a mechanism in a contract they never bothered to read. Firing me is the quickest way for them to shoot themselves in the foot." We hit the 50th floor. My legs burned slightly, but it felt good. It felt real. The elevator is a luxury. The stairs are a reality check. "You see, Noah." I continued talking as if we were discussing the weather and not the end of my career. "There is a clause, a very specific tiny little clause in our lending agreement with North Point Capital. I wrote it myself 6 years ago. It says that if the chief risk officer is removed without a formal board vote, the entire credit facility goes under immediate governance review." Noah stopped on the landing, catching his breath. "What does that mean?" I stopped and looked down at him. He looked small in the gray light of the stairwell. "It means," I said, smiling tightly, "that the moment Damien signed that fake termination letter, he accidentally froze the company bank accounts. He just does not know it yet." I turned back to the stairs. We had 2 more flights. I looked back at my imaginary camera. "I know what you are thinking. You are thinking, Eva, why did you not tell him? Why did you not warn them?" Because that is not how revenge works. You do not warn the person holding the match that they are standing in gasoline. You just hand them the box of matches and wait. We reached the heavy door of the 52nd floor. I could hear the hum of the building differently up here. This was the seat of power. I smoothed my skirt. I checked my reflection in the small glass window of the fire door. My hair was perfect. My lipstick was sharp. I looked like I was ready to give a presentation, not a eulogy for a CEO. Noah stood beside me. He was trembling. "You can go back down, Noah," I said softly. "You do not have to see this." He shook his head. "No. I want to see. I need to know what happens." "Suit yourself," I said. but do not blink. I placed my hand on the door handle. It was cold metal. On the other side of this door, 12 people were sitting in leather chairs, listening to Damian Cole lie to them. They thought I was gone. They thought I was downstairs crying and into a cardboard box. They had no idea that I was the only thing standing between them and total financial collapse. I looked at the time on my phone. It was 9:03. "Okay," I whispered to the empty stairwell. "Let us go to work." I pushed the door open. We stopped on the landing of the 50th floor to catch our breath. Noah was leaning against the concrete wall, clutching the railing like it was the only solid thing left in his world. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, asking how I could possibly be this calm. He asked how I could stand there adjusting my silk scarf while the CEO of a billion-dollar company was upstairs announcing my professional funeral. I told him the truth. I told him that I was not surprised. I told him that today was not a sudden catastrophe. It was just the final scene of a script that I had been watching Damian Cole write for 8 weeks. You see, Noah, this did not start this morning. It did not start with that red envelope. It started exactly 8 weeks ago on a Tuesday. I remember the day because it was raining, that freezing sleet that turns Chicago into a gray blur. I sat down at my desk to prepare for the weekly risk committee meeting. It is a standing meeting. It has been on my calendar at 10 o'clock every Tuesday for 5 years. According to the corporate bylaws, my attendance is mandatory. I am the Vice President of Risk Management. You literally cannot have the meeting without me. But when I opened my Outlook calendar that Tuesday, the slot was empty. At first I thought it was a glitch. Technology fails. It happens. But then I tried to access the credit risk dashboard to pull the weekly numbers. Access denied. I tried to log into the fraud alert system to check the flagged vendor list. Access denied. I called the IT department. I spoke to a kid named Kevin who usually fixes my problems in 30 seconds. This time Kevin sounded strange. He sounded rehearsed. He told me that they were doing a system migration and that permissions were being reset in batches. He said it would be fixed in 24 hours. That was a lie. I know when people are lying to me. It is part of my job description. You do not do a system migration at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in the middle of a fiscal quarter. You do it at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning when nobody is watching. I did not argue with Kevin. I hung up the phone and I sat there in the silence of my office. The silence told me everything I needed to know. I was being walled off. 2 days later, I saw Trisha Vaughn in the hallway. Trisha is our Chief Operating Officer. She is a woman who laughs too loud at her own jokes and usually stops at my desk to tell me about her golden retrievers. We have worked together for 7 years. I know her tells. I was walking toward the break room and she was walking toward me. The moment she saw me, her eyes darted to the floor. She pretended to be intensely interested in a smudge on the carpet. She sped up. As she passed me, she mumbled a quick hello without breaking stride and practically ran around the corner. I stopped and watched her go. In my line of work, you learn that sudden behavioral changes usually mean one of two things. Either their marriage is collapsing or the company is. I looked at the back of Trisha's expensive suit and I made a calculation. Trisha loves her husband, but Trisha loves her stock options more. It was the company. That afternoon, I did not try to fight the IT department to get my access back. I did not storm into Damian's office to demand an explanation. That is what an amateur would do. That is what they wanted me to do. They wanted me to be loud. They wanted me to be the angry, emotional woman who could be dismissed as difficult. Instead, I went to the physical archives in the basement. I spent 4 hours down there surrounded by dust and boxes of old files. I was looking for the foundation. I went all the way back to the beginning when Harborline was just a scrappy startup and we needed money desperately. I pulled out the original credit facility agreements we signed with North Point Capital. North Point is our biggest lender. They hold the leash. If they pull on it, we choke. I sat on a cold metal folding chair under a flickering fluorescent light and I read every single page of that 300-page agreement. I was looking for something I remembered vaguely from years ago. A safety mechanism I had insisted on inserting back when Damian was just a reckless visionary and not a reckless tyrant. And there it was. On page 112, Clause 14b, it was beautiful. It was a paragraph of legal text that was about to become the most important weapon in my arsenal. The clause stated clearly that the position of Chief Risk Officer was considered a key person role. It stipulated that if the Chief Risk Officer was removed or fired, without a formal recorded vote by the full board of directors, the entire credit facility would be placed under immediate governance review. This meant that North Point had the right to freeze all outgoing funds instantly while they investigated the management change. I sat there in the basement and smiled. I understood Damien's plan perfectly. He wanted to fire me, but he did not want to explain why to the board. If he took it to the board, they would ask questions. They would ask why he was firing the person who had just saved them $10 million in compliance fines last year. He could not afford questions. So he decided to do it the dirty way. He decided to lock me out, fake a performance review, and have security escort me out before the board meeting even started. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was bypassing the bureaucracy. But what he did not realize was that by bypassing the board, he was walking right into a bear trap. If he fired me without a vote, he breached the covenant. If he breached the covenant, North Point froze the money. If the money froze, the company would be insolvent in less than 2 weeks. He was handing me the detonator to a bomb he did not even know existed. But I needed more. I needed to know why. Why now? Why was he so desperate to get rid of me that he would risk everything? I went back to my desk and started looking at the public filings. Since I was locked out of the internal systems, I had to look at what we were telling the outside world. I pulled the financial report from the last quarter. I read the footnotes. Nobody reads the footnotes. I do? I found an entry for a strategic partnership with a fund called Horizon Acceleration Partners. It was listed as a consultancy firm helping us with data infrastructure. We had paid them $4 million in the last 3 months. I had never heard of them. I ran a search on Bloomberg. Nothing. I checked the state business registries in Delaware and Nevada. Nothing. I checked the Chamber of Commerce database. Zero. Horizon Acceleration Partners did not exist. It was a ghost. It was a shell. I dug deeper. I found a cached version of a website for a small limited liability company with a similar name that had been taken down 2 weeks ago. The registered agent for that company was a lawyer in the Cayman Islands. I realized then that this was not just about office politics. This was theft. Damien was moving money out of the company into a black hole, and I was the only person with the oversight authority to catch him. That was why my calendar was empty. That was why Trisha could not look me in the eye. Trisha knew. She was too weak to stop him, but she knew. That night, 8 weeks ago, I stood by the window of my apartment on the 35th floor. I looked down at the Chicago River winding through the city like a dark ribbon. The cars below were just streaks of red and white light. I held my phone in my hand and opened my notes app. I wrote down a single line. It was not a plan of attack. It was a philosophy of war. I wrote, "Do not fight head on. Just step aside and let them step into their own trap." I knew then that I would let them fire me. I would not scream. I would not fight for my access codes. I would let Damien feel like he was winning every single day for 8 weeks. I would let him get confident. I would let him get arrogant. I would let him think he had successfully cut my throat. Because the only way to catch a man like Damien Cole is to let him think he is untouchable right up until the moment the floor drops out from under him. I looked at Noah standing there on the stairs, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Noah," I said, my voice echoing in the stairwell. I knew this was coming. I let it happen. "Because now we have them exactly where we need them." He looked at me confused. "Where is that?" "In violation of a federal banking contract," I said. I checked my watch. We had wasted enough time on history. The future was waiting upstairs. "Come on," I said. "We have a board meeting to crash." The war room was not a glass office with a view of the skyline. It was a dusty office in a brownstone on the north side of Chicago that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. This was the domain of Adam Klein. Adam is 60 years old and looks more like a philosophy professor who got lost on his way to a lecture than a corporate attorney. He wears tweed jackets with patches on the elbows, and he reads contracts with a magnifying glass even though his prescription glasses are perfectly fine. I sat across from him 2 weeks ago, pushing a stack of documents toward him. "Adam," I said, "tell me I am right." He adjusted his glasses and pulled the heavy file toward him. It was the full credit agreement with North Point Capital. I had bookmarked page 112 with a yellow sticky note. Adam read it in silence. He reads painfully slowly. He traces the lines with his finger. It is a terrifying habit to watch when your entire career hangs in the balance. After 5 minutes, he looked up and took a sip of his lukewarm tea. "Eva," he said, his voice raspy and calm, "this is not a contract clause. This is a suicide button." I leaned forward. "Explain it to me like I am a jury member, Adam." He tapped the paper. "It says here that the Chief Risk Officer is a designated key person for the purpose of credit monitoring. It says that if you are removed from your position without a recorded affirmative vote from the full board of directors, it constitutes a material breach of covenant. And the penalty," I asked, knowing the answer, but needing to hear him say it. "The penalty is an automatic freeze on all credit tranches," he said. "North Point shuts off the tap. And then they trigger an immediate governance review. That means the lenders step in and force the board to meet. They basically take the keys away from the driver until they figure out why the passenger was thrown out of the car." I nodded. A cold satisfaction settled in my chest. So if Damien fires me on his own authority, he effectively bankrupts the company for the duration of the review. Adam looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Yes, but Eva, you realize that if you pull this trigger, you are crashing the plane with yourself inside it." "I am not crashing the plane, Adam," I said, standing up and walking to his window. "I am just putting on a parachute. Damien is the one flying into the mountain. I am just making sure the black box records everything." We spent the next 2 hours drafting a document. It was a formal letter titled Governance Breach Notice. It was addressed to the senior managing partner at North Point Capital. The language was dry and lethal. It simply stated that the undersigned officer had been terminated without board approval, and that pursuant to Clause 14B, the company was now in default. I saved the email in my drafts folder on my phone. It sat there like a loaded gun. All I had to do was press send, but I knew that simply breaking the company was not enough. If I just froze the money, the board might panic and rally around Damien. They might see me as the villain who sabotaged the ship. I needed to offer them a lifeboat. That is why I went to see Lighthouse Equity. Lighthouse is what polite people call a distressed asset firm. Impolite people call them vultures. I call them necessary. I had a quiet dinner with a partner I knew there named Marcus. I laid it out for him. I told him Harborline was about to hit a liquidity crisis due to a governance failure. I told him the stock price was going to take a hit. Marcus listened while cutting his steak. "And what is the play, Eva?" he asked. I slid a term sheet across the table. "You prepare a rescue package, a capital injection to pay off North Point and stabilize operations. But you attach a condition, which is," Marcus asked, picking up the paper. "The capital is contingent on the removal of the CEO within 24 hours of the breach," I said. Marcus smiled. It was a shark smile. "You want us to buy the company and fire your boss for you." "I want you to save the company," I corrected him. "And saving the company requires cutting out the cancer." Back in Adam's office the next day, I told him about the lighthouse arrangement. Adam looked worried. He rubbed his temples. "Eva," he said, "this plan is brilliant, but it is dangerous. The governance clause gets you a hearing. The lighthouse offer gets you leverage. But neither of them guarantees that the board will side with you. Damien is charismatic. He has made them a lot of money on paper. If it comes down to his word against yours, they might just pay the penalty fee to North Point and keep Damien." "I know," I said. "You need more," Adam said. "You need a smoking gun. This plan only works if you have evidence that Damien is actually dirty, not just incompetent, dirty." I looked at Adam. "I do not bet on feelings, Adam. I just need you to confirm the law. As for the evidence, you can consider me a walking fraud detection system. I know where the bodies are buried because I am usually the one who has to check the soil quality." The investigation began that afternoon. Since my access was restricted, I had to use a proxy. That proxy was Noah Pierce. Noah did not know what he was looking for. I told him I needed him to run a routine vendor audit for a legacy project. I gave him a list of 20 vendors to check so he would not get suspicious. Buried in the middle of that list was one name, Lakefront Vector LLC. It took Noah 2 days to get me the raw data. We met in a coffee shop 3 blocks away from the office. He handed me a flash drive thinking he was just helping me with some paperwork. I took the drive home and plugged it into my personal laptop. I opened the spreadsheet. I filtered for Lakefront Vector. There were 12 payments in the last 8 months. The total was nearly $4 million. The invoices were vague. They were for strategic infrastructure consulting and data latency optimization. I ran a background check on Lakefront Vector. It was a Delaware shell company, but every company leaves a footprint. I dug into the domain registration for their email server. It was registered to a residential address in the Gold Coast neighborhood, 1100 North Lakeshore Drive, Unit 42B. I knew that address. I had sent a bottle of expensive scotch to that address last Christmas. It was the penthouse apartment Damien Cole was renting for his mistress. I laughed out loud in my empty apartment. It was a dark sound. Damien was not even trying to be clever. He was funneling company money into a fake vendor to pay for his personal real estate. He was literally stealing from the shareholders to pay his rent. But I needed to tie it to him directly. An address match was strong but circumstantial. He could claim it was a coincidence. He could claim he was renting the apartment from the vendor. I needed his voice. I went back to the archives. I scanned the email server backups. I have a read-only archive access that they forgot to revoke because it is tied to the compliance audit protocol, not the active user directory. I searched for the phrase, Lakefront Vector. Nothing. He was too smart for that. I searched for the address. Nothing. Then I searched for the amount of the last invoice. $350,000. Bingo. I found an email thread between Damien Tricia and the chief financial officer. The subject line was simply, adjustment. In the email, the CFO asked Damien how to categorize the latest outflow to the consulting partner because it was exceeding the budget cap for external vendors. Damien's reply was short and fatal. He wrote, "Just bury it under the R&D capital expenditure. We can amortize it over 5 years so it does not hit the quarterly earnings. As long as Eva does not see this, the board will never know." I stared at the screen. My heart rate did not even speed up. I felt a profound sense of calm. He had written it down. He had typed out his intent to deceive the board and explicitly named me as the obstacle to his fraud. I printed the email. I printed the invoices. I printed the property records for the penthouse. I took a black folder from my desk drawer. I punched holes in the documents and arranged them carefully. First the address match, then the invoices, and finally the email. I closed the folder and picked up a silver marker. I wrote 3 words on the cover, kill folder. I placed it in my briefcase next to the draft of the North Point notice. I was ready. I had the trap. I had the bait. And now I had the bullet. All I had to do was wait for them to walk me to the executioner. We were somewhere between the 50th and 51st floor when Noah Pierce looked like he was going to pass out. The air in the stairwell was stale and smelled faintly of industrial cleaning solvent and old dust. It was the smell of the parts of the building that the executives pretend do not exist. My breathing was steady. In, out. In, out. It was a rhythm I had perfected over years of marathon training and navigating corporate crises. Noah, however, sounded like a broken air conditioner unit rattling against a wall. He grabbed the metal railing with a clammy hand and stopped, his chest heaving inside his cheap polyester blend suit. "Eva, stop," he wheezed, looking up at me with eyes that were wide with panic. "How are you doing this? How are you just walking up these stairs like you are going to a brunch?" I paused on the landing and looked down at him. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. "It is just cardio, Noah." I said, "You should try it. It clears the cortisol." "No, not the stairs," he said, his voice cracking. "The situation. Why are you not losing your mind right now? They just fired you. I handed you the letter. I saw the signature. Your career is over. We should be packing your box. We should be calling a headhunter. Why are we walking toward the people who just stabbed you in the back?" I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a bomb disposal technician who just realized the bomber cut the wrong wire. "My career is not over, Noah," I said, taking a step down to be eye level with him. "And I am not mad because anger is a waste of energy. Anger makes you sloppy. Anger makes you scream and make threats you cannot back up. I do not make threats. I make arrangements. I tapped the folder under my arm. You think they fired me? I continued, keeping my voice low and echoing off the concrete walls. But they did not fire me. They just walked blindfolded into a minefield. When Damien signed that letter, he did not just end my employment. He unlocked a mechanism in our lending contract that he evidently forgot to read. Noah blinked, wiping sweat from his forehead. What mechanism? I turned and started climbing again, forcing him to keep up if he wanted the answer. It is called a covenant breach, I said over my shoulder. Listen closely because this is the part where you learn how the world actually works. Our biggest lender, North Point Capital, gave us $100 million based on stability. They do not trust Damien. They trust the systems that keep Damien in check. That system is me. I reached the turn of the 51st floor. There is a clause, I said, speaking to the air as much as to Noah. Clause 14b. It says that if the chief risk officer is removed without a formal recorded meeting of the board of directors, the company is immediately flagged as high risk. It triggers a default event. I stopped and looked back at him. Do you know what a default event means, Noah? He shook his head. It means the bank calls the loan. I said, it means they freeze the accounts. It means Damien has to explain to the shareholders why the credit lines just evaporated. Firing me is the quickest way for him to shoot himself in the foot. I'm just going upstairs to hand him the gun. I looked away from Noah and stared at the blank concrete wall, but in my mind, I was looking directly at a camera lens. I imagined all of you watching this. I know some of you are listening to this on your commute right now, maybe sitting in traffic on the I-95 or taking the subway in New York. Maybe you have a boss who thinks he's a god because he has a corner office and a corporate credit card. If you are listening to this and you work in a place where the drama is thicker than the coffee, do me a favor. Go to the comments section right now and type the word drama in all caps. Do it for me. I want to know I am not the only one hiking up a stairwell to start a war, because let me tell you, it is lonely at the bottom, but it is going to be very crowded at the top in about 5 minutes. I turned back to the door marked Floor 52. This was it, the threshold. On the other side of this heavy steel door was the plush carpet, the mahogany tables, and the climate-controlled silence of the executive suite. On this side, it was just concrete and the heavy breathing of a terrified analyst. I put my hand on the door handle. It was cool to the touch. Noah, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, you do not have to do this. You delivered the letter. You did what you were told. You can turn around, walk down to the lobby, get a coffee, and pretend you never saw me. Nobody will blame you. Noah looked at the door, then back at the stairs going down. He looked at the red confidential envelope still clutched in his hand, crumpled now from his grip. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and looked at me. I am not going down, he said. Why? I asked. He let out a nervous laugh. Because if I go down, I am just the guy who delivered the mail. If I go in there with you, I am a witness. Besides, I want to see his face. I need something to tell HR when they ask me what happened today. I nodded. Good answer. I checked my phone one last time. The screen illuminated my face in the dim light. The time was exactly 9 o'clock and 3 minutes in the morning. I want you to remember that time. 9 o'clock and 3 minutes. Because right now, Damien Cole is probably standing at the head of the table, clicking through his slides, talking about synergy and growth and the bright future of Harborline DataWorks. He thinks he has won. He thinks the problem is solved because the problem has been removed from the building. He has no idea that the problem is standing 5 feet away from him, separated only by a layer of drywall and a fire door. He thinks this is the end of my story. He thinks this is the part where I fade to black. I gripped the handle tighter. No one told him that this is just the opening credits. I looked at Noah. Ready? He nodded, though he looked like he might vomit. Ready? I pushed the handle down. The latch clicked a sharp, metallic sound that signaled the end of the piece and the beginning of the violence. They think they fired me. The boardroom on the 52nd floor is what we call the aquarium. It is a massive rectangular space enclosed entirely in floor-to-ceiling glass that offers a panoramic view of the Chicago River and the sprawling gray city beneath it. In the center of the room sits a 30-foot table made of reclaimed walnut that probably costs more than my father made in a decade. The chairs are Italian leather. The air is filtered and scented with something that smells like citrus and money. It is designed to make you feel small. It is designed to make you feel lucky just to be allowed inside. When I pushed the heavy door open, the room was in the middle of a performance. Damian Cole stood at the head of the table. He was wearing a navy bespoke suit that fit him perfectly. He was gesturing at a large projection screen displaying a graph with an arrow pointing aggressively upward. He was talking about the digital horizon and synergy and paradigm shifts. It was the kind of speech that sounds brilliant until you actually write down the words and realize he has said absolutely nothing for 10 minutes. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the room went silent. It was instantaneous. Damian stopped mid-sentence. His hand was still raised in the air, pointing at his imaginary future. 12 heads turned in unison, the board of directors. These were men and women who controlled billions of dollars in capital, yet right now they looked like school children caught passing notes. I did not stop walking. I signaled Noah to follow me. My heels sank into the plush carpet, making no sound. The silence stretched out tight and brittle. Damian lowered his hand. He adjusted his silk tie. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, but he smoothed it over instantly with that practiced CEO smile. It is a smile that does not reach the eyes. Eva, he said, his voice smooth and dangerously polite. I am surprised to see you. I was under the impression that you had already been briefed this morning. He said it casually, as if I had just walked into the wrong meeting by mistake. He was trying to frame the narrative immediately. In his version of reality, I was already an outsider. I was a former employee who had lost her way. I stopped at the foot of the table. I looked at him. I did not smile. I was briefed, Damian, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. But I think there was a clerical error. I thought we should clear it up in person. Damian chuckled. It was a dismissive sound. He looked at the board members and gave a small shrug as if to say, Can you believe this woman? There is no error, Eva, he said. In fact, since you are here, we might as well make this official. It will save HR the postage. He turned his gaze to Noah, who was standing just behind my right shoulder. Noah was vibrating. I could literally feel the fear radiating off him. Mr. Pierce Damian said, snapping his fingers. You have the tablet. Read the notice. Noah froze. He looked at me, then he looked at Damian. Read it. Damian commanded, his voice dropping an octave. The smile was gone. This was the tyrant coming out. He wanted a public execution. He wanted to humiliate me in front of the most powerful people in the company. He wanted to show them that he could cut off a vice president's head and have a junior analyst clean up the blood. Noah swallowed hard. He lifted the tablet with shaking hands. He cleared his throat. Notice of termination, he read, his voice trembling. To Eva Hayes, effective immediately. Your employment with Harborline DataWorks is hereby terminated for cause. The reasons listed are failure to align with strategic vision, obstruction of growth initiatives, and loss of executive confidence. The words hung in the air. I watched the faces around the table. Ellison Grant, the chairman of the board, took off his glasses and frowned. He looked confused. Tricia Vaughn, the COO, stared at her notepad, refusing to look up. She knew. Her silence was her complicity. Ellison spoke up. Damian, I was not aware we were making changes at the executive level today. The risk committee has not met about this. Damian waved his hand, dismissing the concern. It is a necessary restructuring, Ellison. Eva has done adequate work in the past, but we are moving to a new phase of aggression in the market. We cannot have a risk officer who sees a stop sign at every corner. I am exercising my prerogative as CEO to streamline the team. We need speed, not bureaucracy. He looked back at me. His eyes were cold. You have heard the notice, Eva. You are no longer an employee of this corporation. You do not have security clearance to be in this room. Please leave before I call security to escort you out. It was a power play. He was betting that my pride would make me storm out. He was betting that I would get angry and scream and prove his point that I was emotional and unstable. I did not move. Instead, I walked to the third chair on the left. My chair. The leather was worn in the shape of my spine. I pulled the chair out. The legs scraped against the floor. It was a harsh sound that made everyone flinch. I sat down. I placed my leather portfolio on the table. I clasped my hands in front of me. I looked straight down the length of the table directly into Damien's eyes. Damien sighed. "Eva, this is embarrassing. You are trespassing. Are you sure about that, Damien?" I asked. My voice was low, but in the silence of that room, it sounded like a gunshot. He blinked. "Excuse me. I asked if you are sure," I said, leaning forward slightly, "because that document you just forced poor Noah to read, the one with the forged signature, it did more than just fire me." Damien laughed. A nervous laugh this time. "You are talking nonsense. Security is on the way." I ignored him. I turned to Ellison Grant. "Ellison," I said, "do you recall the credit covenants we signed with North Point Capital 6 years ago? Specifically Clause 14B regarding key person events?" Ellison frowned. He looked at Damien, then back at me. Vaguely. "Why?" "Because," I said, turning back to Damien, "that clause states that if the chief risk officer is removed without a recorded affirmative vote of the full board of directors, the entire lending facility goes into immediate default." The room went deadly quiet. The kind of quiet you hear before a tornado touches down. Damien's face turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. "That is a lie," he snapped. "There is no such clause." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Actually, Damien, there is," I said, "and by reading that notice aloud and confirming my termination without a vote, you just triggered it. You did not just fire me, you just froze the company's bank accounts." I unlocked my phone. I had the email drafted. The governance breach notice addressed to the senior partners at North Point. It was sitting in the outbox. Damien lunged forward, placing his hands on the table. "Do not touch that phone." I looked at him. I looked at the fear in his eyes. He realized in that split second that he had made a fatal error. He had assumed he knew the rules. He had assumed that power was about who could shout the loudest. He forgot that power is actually about who reads the fine print. "Too late," I said. My thumb hovered over the send button. "You said I do not belong in this room, Damien. You said I am a barrier to growth. Well, let us see how much you grow when your credit line hits 0. I pressed the blue arrow on my screen. The screen refreshed. Sent. I placed the phone face down on the table. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9 o'clock and 7 minutes. I want you to mark that time. 9 o'clock and 7 minutes. From this moment on, the clock is ticking. Every second that passes is another dollar lost. Every second is another panicked email arriving in the inbox of the General Counsel. Every second is the sound of a noose tightening around Damien Cole's neck." Damien stared at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my legs. "You might want to check your email." "Ellison," I said calmly, "I believe our lenders have some questions." The air in the room shifted. It was heavy. It was electric. And for the first time in 8 weeks, I finally relaxed. The bomb was armed, the timer was running, and I had the best seat in the house to watch it explode. Ellison Grant leaned forward in his chair at the head of the table. He is a man who has weathered 3 recessions and a federal antitrust investigation. He does not scare easily, but looking at the phone I had just placed face down on the mahogany table, he looked genuinely unsettled. He took off his rimless glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice low and devoid of the usual boardroom pleasantries. "You just told the CEO of this company that he has frozen our assets. That is a very serious accusation. What exactly are you implying?" I did not answer him immediately. I stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a stack of papers I had prepared at 4 o'clock this morning. There were 12 copies. I walked around the table, sliding one copy in front of each board member. The sound of the paper hitting the polished wood was the only noise in the room. Damien watched me like a hawk. He looked ready to snatch the papers away, but he knew he could not do it without looking like a lunatic. I returned to my seat, but I did not sit down. I stood behind my chair, my hands resting on the backrest. I am not implying anything, Ellison, I said, my voice steady. I am stating a contractual fact. Please turn your attention to the highlighted section on page 3. This is an excerpt from our master credit agreement with North Point Capital, specifically Clause 14B. I waited. The sound of rustling paper filled the room. 12 pairs of eyes scanned the text. I saw eyebrows raise. I saw jaws tighten. Clause 14B, I continued reciting it from memory, explicitly states that the position of Chief Risk Officer is designated as a key person for the purpose of risk mitigation. It further states that any removal, termination, or significant alteration of this role must be approved by a recorded majority vote of the Board of Directors. I paused to let that sink in. If the officer is removed unilaterally, I said, looking directly at Damien, the agreement views it as a hostile governance breach. The penalty is automatic. The lender has the right to freeze all revolving credit lines immediately and demand an emergency governance review. Damien slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. It is a standard clause. It is boilerplate text, Ava. No bank in the world enforces that kind of technicality unless the company is missing payments. We are profitable. North Point is not going to shut us down because I made a personnel change. You are fear-mongering. I looked at him with a pitying expression. You think it is a technicality, Damien, I asked? That is why you are dangerous. To a bank, risk is not a technicality. Risk is math, and you just changed the equation without asking permission. I picked up my phone again. I tapped the screen and hit the speaker button. Let me play you a voicemail I received yesterday afternoon, I said. This is from Marcus Thorne. He is the senior managing partner at North Point. I called him confidentially to ask for a hypothetical clarification on Clause 14B. I held the phone up. The audio was crisp in the silent room. Eva, look, if the board votes you out, that is one thing. Marcus's voice said, tinny but distinct. We might raise the rates, but we will stay in the deal. But if Cole tries to push you out the back door without a vote, do not let him. If he does that, it voids the governance warranty. Our legal team would be required to lock the accounts within the hour. We cannot lend $100 million to a captain who throws the navigator overboard. I stopped the recording. Damien's face was flushed. A vein throbbed in his temple. He pointed a finger at me. You set this up, he hissed. You called them. You baited them. I did not bait anyone, Damien, I replied coolly. I asked a question. You provided the answer when you had Noah read that termination letter 5 minutes ago. Just then a sound pinged from the front of the room. It was the projector. Damien was still connected to the system for his presentation. His laptop was mirroring his screen on the massive wall behind him. A notification banner had just slid into view in the top right corner. It was an email notification. The sender was North Point Capital Legal Department. The subject line was written in bold red text. Notice of default and immediate freeze of assets. The first line of the preview text was visible to everyone in the room. Dear Mr. A. Grant and Mr. E. Cole, we are writing to express our grave concern regarding the breach of covenants by the current CEO. Effective immediately, all credit facilities are suspended pending. The notification vanished after 5 seconds, but the damage was permanent. The room erupted. 3 board members began typing furiously on their phones. Trisha Vaughn dropped her pen. Ellison Grant turned slowly to look at the screen where Damien's optimistic growth chart was now overshadowed by the ghost of that email. Damien spun around looking at the screen, then back at the board. Wait, he stammered, holding up his hands. Wait, this is an automated response. I can fix this. I will call Marcus right now. I will explain that Eva is confused and that we are just restructuring. I looked at my watch. The time was 9 o'clock and 12 minutes. You cannot fix it with a phone call, Damien, I said, my voice cutting through his panic. Because the money is already gone. I turned to the board. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, speaking quickly now, let me explain what just happened to your liquidity. Harborline operates on a cash flow cycle of 14 days. We rely on the North Point revolving credit line to cover payroll and server costs while we wait for client receivables. I walked over to the whiteboard next to the screen. I picked up a red marker. I wrote the number 12 on the board. We have 12 days of cash on hand, I said. After that, we cannot pay the cloud providers. If we cannot pay the cloud providers, the data centers go dark. If the data centers go dark, our clients sue us for breach of contract. I circled the number 12. But that is the best case scenario, I continued. The reality is worse. We are a publicly traded company. North Point is required to file a disclosure with the SEC regarding this material change in our credit status. They will likely file it by the end of the business day. I turned to look at the faces around the table. When that filing hits the wire, I said the market will not ask whose fault it is. They will just see that the bank cut us off. The stock price will not just dip, it will collapse. We are looking at a 40 to 60% drop in share value by tomorrow morning. I capped the marker. The click was loud. And the only reason this is happening, I said, pointing at Damien, is because one man decided he was above the bylaws of his own company. Damien looked like a trapped animal. He was sweating now. The confident visionary from 10 minutes ago was gone. In his place was a desperate man looking for a scapegoat. She did this, he shouted, pointing at me. His voice cracked. She orchestrated this whole thing. She knew about the clause and she waited until today to spring it. She is holding the company hostage. This is corporate sabotage, Ellison. She is trying to burn the house down because I fired her. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but I kept my face completely impassive. This was the moment. This was the pivot point. If I got angry, I lost. If I stayed cold, I won. I did not orchestrate anything, Damien, I said, stepping closer to him. You are the one who signed the termination letter. You are the one who forged my signature on the waiver. You are the one who ignored the warnings from legal about governance compliance. I looked him in the eye. I am not the arsonist, Damien, I said softly. I am just the fire alarm. You are the one playing with matches in a room full of gasoline. I just followed the protocol that you agreed to when you took the money. Ellison Grant slammed his hand on the table again. Enough, he roared. Silence fell over the room instantly. Ellison stood up. He is a tall man, and when he stands up, everyone pays attention. He looked at Damien with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Damien, sit down, Ellison commanded. But Ellison, she is. Damien started. Sit down, Damien. Ellison repeated his voice like a whip. Damien hesitated, then sank into his chair. He looked small. Ellison turned to me. He took a deep breath. Ms. Hayes, he said, you are telling us that the credit line is frozen as of right now. Yes, I said. And you are telling us that the only trigger for this freeze was your removal from the role of Chief Risk Officer. That is correct, I said. The bank requires a stable oversight figure. Without a board vote, the oversight is considered compromised. Ellison looked at the screen where the email notification had appeared. He looked at the stack of papers I had distributed. Then he looked at me. His eyes were calculating. He was doing the math. He was weighing the value of a CEO who breaks rules against the cost of a bank that breaks companies. Damien, stop the presentation, Ellison said. What Damien asked, blinking. I said stop the presentation, Ellison said firmly. We are done hearing about the digital horizon. I want to hear about the financial cliff we are currently hanging off of. He gestured toward me. A sweeping hand motion that transferred the authority of the room from the head of the table to where I was standing. Ms. Hayes, Ellison said, you seem to be the only person in this room who read the contract. Please continue. Tell us exactly how bad this is and tell us if there is a way out. I nodded. I felt a shift in the gravity of the room. The air was no longer pressing down on me. It was lifting me up. The floor was mine. I looked at Damien. He was staring at his hands. He knew it too. He had lost the room. I turned back to the board. It is very bad, I said honestly, but it is not fatal. Not yet. We have a window, but it is closing rapidly. I checked my watch again. We have less than 20 minutes before the legal department start drafting the public disclosures, I said. We need to move fast. And just like that, the boardroom was no longer Damien's stage. It was my operating theater, and I had the scalpel. I walked over to the head of the table where Damien was still standing. He looked like a statue of a man who had just realized he was made of sand and the tide was coming in. I did not look at him. I simply reached out and pulled the HDMI cable from the side of his laptop. The screen behind him went black for a second. abruptly cutting off his slide about future synergies. I placed my own laptop on the table. It was a sleek black device that I used for forensic auditing. I plugged the cable in. The screen flickered to life. There was no fancy background graphic. There were no inspirational quotes. There was just a stark, high-contrast spreadsheet with data visualization that I had compiled 48 hours ago. Now that we have established that the company is technically in default, I said, my voice calm and carrying, to the back of the room, I think it is time we discuss why Damien was so desperate to fire me without a vote. You see, he knew that if I stayed, I would eventually ask the question that is currently projected on the screen behind me. I pressed the spacebar. A massive red bar graph appeared. It showed a sudden and violent spike in vendor payments over the last 3 fiscal quarters. Meet Lakefront Vector, LLC. I said, pointing to the screen. I walked slowly down the length of the table, making eye contact with every board member. In the last 9 months, Harborline Data Works has transferred exactly $48 million to this entity. The invoices describe the services as strategic data infrastructure consulting and latency optimization. That is a lot of money for consulting. In fact, it is 19% of our total operating budget for the year. I saw Trisha Vaughn, the Chief Operating Officer, stiffen in her chair. She reached for her water glass, and her hand was shaking just enough to make the ice cubes clink. I pressed the key again. The slide changed. This time the screen was split in two. On the left was the vendor registration form for Lakefront Vector LLC. On the right was a residential lease agreement. This was the first punch. Now I am a risk manager, not a real estate agent, I said, allowing a dry smile to touch my lips. But I find it incredibly fascinating that this cutting-edge data consulting firm lists its headquarters at 1100 North Lake Shore Drive, Unit 42B. I paused for effect. Does anyone recognize that address? Silence. I clicked the remote again. A photo of a luxury apartment listing appeared. It is the penthouse unit currently leased to one Mr. Damien Cole, I said. A gasp went around the room. It was soft but audible. And if that is not enough of a coincidence, I continued, pointing to the contact section of the vendor form. Look at the phone number listed for the primary billing contact. I recognize that area code. I recognize the exchange. In fact, if I were to dial that number right now, the phone in the pocket of Damien's executive assistant standing outside this door would start ringing. Damien pushed himself off the table. His face was a mask of red fury and panic. "This is absurd," he sputtered. His voice was high and tight. "That is a holding structure. It is a common practice for stealth projects. We needed a secure off-site location to work on sensitive intellectual property without alerting competitors. I used my residence for legal expediency. It is a strategic flexibility, Eva. You are twisting standard operating procedure into a conspiracy." I looked at him. Strategic flexibility. That was good. It was the kind of buzzword nonsense that usually worked on this board. "Is that so, Damien?" I asked. I turned back to the screen. "Then explain this." I clicked the next slide. It was a scanned copy of an email chain. The subject line read, "Horizon Fund Allocation." The timestamp was from 5 weeks ago. The sender was Damien Cole. The recipients were the Chief Financial Officer and Trisha Vaughn. I read the highlighted text aloud, my voice devoid of emotion. "We need to move the next tranche of $12 million into the Horizon Acceleration Partners account by Friday. Make sure it is categorized under R&D capital expenditure. We can amortize it over 5 years so it does not hit the quarterly earnings immediately. And whatever you do, keep this off the main ledger. As long as Eva does not see this chain, the board will never know." I let the words hang there. As long as Eva does not see this. I turned to look at Trisha Vaughn. She was staring at the table, her face pale. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Trisha," I said softly, "you are the COO. You approve these payments. Did you know you were sending $12 million to a ghost?" Trisha did not answer. She closed her eyes. A young board member named Kevin, who represented one of the pension funds, raised his hand. He looked like he was about to be sick. "Ms. Hayes," he asked, his voice quiet, "is Horizon Acceleration Partners a real fund?" I picked up a single sheet of paper from my stack and slid it across the table to him. I checked every database available. Kevin, I answered. I checked the Delaware corporate registry. I checked the Cayman Islands. I checked the SEC filings. Horizon Acceleration Partners does not exist. There is no office. There are no employees. There is no portfolio. It is just a bank account in the Cook Islands set up to receive wire transfers from Harbor Line. Kevin looked at the paper, then he looked at Damien with a look of pure betrayal. Damien, I said, turning back to the CEO, you did not build a stealth project. You built a washing machine. You have been siphoning shareholder money into a shell company using fake invoices for services that were never rendered. Damien opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. And you did not do it alone, I added. I turned to Noah Pierce. The young analyst was still standing by the door, holding the tablet like a shield. He looked terrified, but I nodded to him, a signal that it was safe to step off the ledge. Noah, I said, tell the board what you told me about the Excel files. Noah took a step forward. His legs were shaking, but he cleared his throat. I was asked to make adjustments, he said, his voice cracking. The CFO came to my desk. He asked me to manually reclassify the payments to Lakefront Vector. He told me to break them down into smaller amounts so they would not trigger the automatic audit flags. Noah looked at the floor, then he looked up at Ellison Grant, the chairman. I kept the original files, Sir Noah said. I saved the version history. You can see the edits. You can see who authorized them. I sent them to Eva because I was scared. Why were you scared? Son Ellison asked, his voice gentle but firm. Noah took a deep breath. Because it smelled weird, he said. It felt like when you burn toast and try to scrape the black part off so nobody notices. But you can still smell the smoke. I smiled. It was the perfect metaphor. Thank you, Noah, I said. I turned back to the room. You heard him, I said. That is the smell of a burning ship being painted fresh white paint to hide the char marks. Damien has been running this company like his personal piggy bank, and he fired me because I was the only one standing near the fire extinguisher. I leaned against the table, crossing my arms. The room was deadly silent. The atmosphere had shifted completely. 5 minutes ago, they were worried about a credit freeze. Now they were realizing that the credit freeze was the least of their problems. Ellison Grant looked at the screen where the damning email was still projected. He looked at the $48 million figure. He looked at Damien, who was now slumped in his chair looking at his hands. Ellison was not just a businessman. He was liable. Every person at this table was liable. If the SEC found out about this before they did, they were all facing negligence charges. Damien started to speak. His voice was a whisper. I intended to pay it back, he said. It was a bridge loan. I had a personal investment that went wrong. I just needed liquidity. I was going to put it back before the audit. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. You borrowed $48 million from the company without asking, I said. In my world, Damien, we do not call that a bridge loan. We call that embezzlement, and we call that prison time. I looked at the board members. I saw the realization hitting them one by one. This was not an HR issue. This was not a strategy disagreement. This was a crime scene. And Damien had left his fingerprints on every single surface. I checked the time. It is getting late, I said. The markets open in 30 minutes. Northpoint is drafting their disclosure. The SEC whistleblower portal is open on my laptop right now. I tapped the key on my keyboard one last time. The screen changed to show the SEC submission page. The form was filled out. The attachments were uploaded. The mouse cursor was hovering over the submit button. You have a choice, I said. You can keep the CEO who stole from you and watch this company burn to the ground by lunchtime. Or you can do the one thing that might convince Northpoint and the authorities that you were victims and not accomplices. I looked at Ellison. It is your move, Mr. Chairman, I said. But if I were you, I would move very fast. I reached into my leather portfolio one last time. By now, the sound of my hand sliding into that bag was making the entire room flinch. They had learned that every time I touched that leather, something terrible was about to happen to their careers. I pulled out a thin gray document. It was not thick like the credit agreement, and it was not colorful like the marketing slides. It was staple-bound and stamped with the logo of our internal audit department. I slid it down the center of the table. It spun slowly on the polished wood, coming to a stop directly in front of Damien. 5 weeks ago, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational volume. Our Director of Internal Controls sent this report to the CEO's inbox. It was marked urgent. It flagged the payments to Lakefront Vector as highly irregular and potentially in violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act regarding financial reporting standards. I looked at Damien. He was staring at the gray cover as if it were radioactive. I have a simple question, Damien, I said. Where is this report right now? Damien swallowed. I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. I receive hundreds of reports a week, Eva, he said, his voice raspy. I cannot be expected to read every single internal memo. I probably flagged it for later review. I have not had the time to read it yet. I nodded slowly as if I sympathized with his busy schedule. I thought you might say that, I said, so I took the liberty of asking IT to pull the server logs for that specific file. I tapped a key on my laptop. A new window popped up on the projection screen. It showed a list of timestamps. According to the system log, I said, pointing to the screen, you opened that document 3 times. Once on the 14th at 10 in the evening, once on the 15th at 6 in the morning, and once just 2 days ago. I leaned forward, resting my knuckles on the table, and the duration of each session was exactly 2 minutes, I said. That is just enough time to read the executive summary, realize you had been caught, and then close the file without forwarding it to the audit committee. Damien looked up at me. His eyes were wide with a mix of hatred and fear. He knew I had him. He knew that ignoring a report was negligence, but opening it and then burying it was cover-up. It proved intent. I turned away from him and looked at the rest of the board. This report was suppressed, I said. It never reached the audit committee. It never reached the risk committee. It sat in Damien's inbox while another $12 million left the building. I walked back to my chair and sat down. I turned my laptop around so the screen was facing the board members directly. I minimized the spreadsheet and opened a web browser. The page displayed was the official whistleblower submission portal for the Securities and Exchange Commission. The form was already filled out. Every field was populated. The nature of the violation, the dates, the amounts, the names of the involved parties. I looked at Ellison Grant. This is why I am still in the room. Ellison, I said. I pointed to the blue button at the bottom of the screen. It said, Submit. I could have clicked this button from my apartment this morning, I said. I could have sent this while I was walking up the stairs. If I click this button right now, a federal investigation begins automatically. The FBI will be here by tomorrow morning to seize hard drives. The trading of our stock will be halted. The reputation of every person at this table will be destroyed. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. I did not send it yet. I continued softly. Because I believe that this board deserves one final opportunity to save itself. I believe that you were lied to. I believe that you are victims of a fraud, not the architects of it. I looked at Tricia Vaughn. She was the chief operating officer. She was the one who had avoided my eyes in the hallway for weeks. She was the one who had laughed at Damien's jokes and signed off on his initiatives. But right now, she looked like a woman watching her life flash before her eyes. Tricia. I said, my voice gentle but demanding, look at the screen. Look at the penalties for aiding and abetting corporate fraud. Tricia looked up. Her eyes were red. I know you, Tricia, I said. You have 2 kids in college. You have a reputation in this city. Did you know that Lakefront Vector was Damien's personal account? Tricia shook her head frantically. No, Eva. I swear. Then why did you approve the invoices, I asked. She took a shaky breath. Damien told me it was a black box project, she whispered. He told me to reduce the granularity in the reports. He said that if we put too much detail, the board would panic about the R&D spend. He said he was protecting the vision. I just trusted him. She turned to Ellison, tears welling in her eyes. Ellison, I did not know it was him, she said, her voice breaking. I thought it was real work. I thought we were building something. Damien slammed his hand on the table. Tricia, shut up, he roared. Do not let her manipulate you. She is trying to divide us, but the crack had already appeared. The dam was breaking. Tricia had just handed me Damien's head on a platter. She confirmed that he had actively instructed her to hide information from the board. I turned my attention to Robert Sterling. Robert sat at the far end of the table. He was a longtime friend of Damien. They played golf together every Sunday. He was the one who had always defended Damien's aggressive strategies, but I had something for Robert too. "Robert," I said, "I want you to look at the list of associates for Lakefront Vector again." I clicked back to the vendor slide. "Look at the third name down," I said. Robert squinted at the screen. His face went pale. He pulled his reading glasses out of his pocket and put them on. That is Michael," as he stammered. "Michael Sterling," I said. "Your nephew, the one who just graduated with a degree in marketing, the one you asked Damien to help find a job for last summer." Robert looked at Damien. His expression was one of pure horror. "You hired him. He is listed as a junior consultant for Lakefront Vector," I said. "He has been receiving a salary of $5,000 a month from a shell company that is laundering stolen money." I leaned back in my chair. "Now, Robert." I continued, my voice calm and pragmatic. "I do not think Michael knows what he is involved in. I think he is just a kid who thinks he got a lucky break working for a secret project. But if I click that button on the SEC portal, Michael becomes a named party in a federal money laundering investigation. He becomes a witness. He might even become a suspect." Robert looked at me. He looked terrified. "Eva, please," he said, his voice shaking. "He is 22 years old. He does not know anything." "I know that, Robert," I said, "and I do not want to ruin his life. If we handle this internally today, we can frame his involvement as an administrative error. We can protect him. But if this goes to the feds, I cannot help him. The feds do not care that he is your nephew. They only care that his name is on the payroll of a criminal enterprise." Robert turned slowly to face Damien. The friendship was gone. The golf games were gone. All that was left was a father figure protecting his family from a predator. "You put my nephew on a fake payroll," Robert whispered. "You used my family to hide your theft." Damien held up his hands. "Robert, it is not like that. I was trying to help the kid. I was giving him experience. You made him an accomplice," Robert shouted. He stood up, pushing his chair back so hard it nearly tipped over. "You son of a bitch! You made my nephew an accomplice." The energy in the room shifted physically. It was palpable. 10 minutes ago, the chairs were angled toward the head of the table where Damien stood. They were looking to him for leadership. They were looking to him for answers. Now, one by one, I saw the bodies turn. Ellison Grant turned his chair 45 degrees, so his back was partially to Damien, and he was facing me. Trisha Vaughn wiped her eyes and placed her hands flat on the table, signaling she was done hiding. Robert Sterling remained standing, glaring at Damien with a hatred that burned the air. Even the quiet members, the ones who usually just voted with the majority, put their pens down and crossed their arms. They were no longer an audience for Damien's performance. They were a jury, and they had just seen the evidence. I did not have to scream. I did not have to pound the table. I just had to show them that their survival depended on me, not him. I looked at the clock. 9 o'clock and 16 minutes. "We have 4 minutes left," I said into the silence. 4 minutes before North Point files the disclosure. 4 minutes before the SEC portal times out and requires me to refresh the page. I looked at Ellison. "The alliance has shifted, Mr. Chairman," I said. "You are no longer choosing between a CEO and a risk officer. You are choosing between a quiet internal restructuring and a public federal indictment." Ellison looked at Damien. He looked at the empty chair where Damien's authority used to sit. Then he looked at me. He nodded slowly, a single decisive nod. He reached out and pressed the button on the boardroom intercom. "Carol," he said to the executive assistant outside, "cancel my lunch, and get legal on the line, immediately." Damien sank into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. And for the first time that morning, the air in the room felt breathable. Damien Cole was cornered, but he was not dead yet. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. He looked at the board members who were currently staring at him like he was a contagion. He decided to play the only card he had left. It was the fear card. "You cannot do this," he said, his voice rising. "You cannot remove me. I am the face of this company. I am the one on the magazine covers. If you oust me today, the market will panic. The stock will not just drop, it will flatline. You think North Point freezing the credit is bad. Wait until the institutional investors see that you decapitated the visionary founder. You will be trading at pennies by noon. He looked around the room, trying to find a sympathetic eye. The market will execute Harborline, he shouted. You need me to calm the waters. You need me to spin this. I let him finish. I let the echo of his threat bounce off the glass walls. Then I reached into my bag for the third and final time. This folder was not black like the kill file. It was a bright, optimistic blue. It bore the silver-embossed logo of Lighthouse Equity. I slid it across the table toward Ellison Grant. Actually, Damien, I said, my voice cutting through his bluster, the market does not care about your face. The market cares about liquidity. And since I anticipated that you would try to hold the company hostage with fear of bankruptcy, I took the liberty of securing an insurance policy. Ellison opened the folder. His eyes widened as he scanned the first page. What is this? Ellison asked, looking up at me. I walked to the whiteboard. I erased the number 12 that represented our days of cash remaining. Over the last 4 weeks, I said, addressing the room, I have been in quiet negotiations with the senior partners at Lighthouse Equity. They specialize in distressed asset turnaround, but they also do strategic capital injection for companies with solid fundamentals but leadership issues. I looked at Damien. They have agreed to a comprehensive rescue package. I continued. The term sheet in front of Ellison outlines a cash infusion of $200 million. That is enough to pay off the North Point debt in full immediately. It is enough to cover the operating costs for the next 18 months. And it provides a war chest for the audit cleanup. I saw a glimmer of hope on the faces of the board members. Robert Sterling sat up straighter. Tricia Vaughn wiped her face. $200 million, Ellison repeated. He looked at the document again. This is a binding commitment letter. It is, I confirmed. And the terms are favorable. They are not looking to strip the company. They believe in the underlying technology. They believe in the data infrastructure we built. They just do not believe in the current management. I pointed to the highlighted paragraph on page 5 of the agreement. There is only one condition attached to this money, I said. It is a non-negotiable clause. Lighthouse will not wire a single cent while Damien Cole remains the chief executive officer or holds a seat on this board. The room went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. I continued speaking, keeping my eyes on the board. The agreement states clearly, I said, no funds will be deployed while the company is under the direction of an executive currently under investigation for governance breaches. I pulled out my phone. I have the senior partners from Lighthouse on a secure conference line right now, I said. They are literally standing by. They are waiting for a signal. If you vote to remove Damien, they wire the funds within the hour. The North Point default is cured. The balance sheet is stabilized. The stock price holds. Because you can announce a massive new strategic investment at the same time you announce the leadership change. I looked at Damien. So you see, Damien, I said, you are not the safety net. You are the blockage. You are the only thing standing between this company and $200 million. Damien looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He looked at the blue folder, then at me. His face twisted into a snarl. This is a coup, he screamed. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You planned this whole thing. You set me up. This is not about the company. This is about your ego. You are angry because I sidelined you, so you decided to burn my reputation down. This is personal vengeance, Eva. I looked at him. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no triumph, just the cold clarity of a job well done. Damien, I said, my voice steady. If I just wanted to destroy you, I would have clicked submit on that SEC whistleblower portal 20 minutes ago. I would be sitting on my couch at home eating popcorn, watching the FBI raid this building on the news. I walked closer to him. I did not do that, I said. I came here. I walked up 52 flights of stairs. I put myself in the line of fire. I secured a rescue package that saves the jobs of everyone in this building, including the people sitting at this table who let you get away with this for months. I turned back to the board. I am not here to feed my ego, I said. I am here to give you an option. You can keep Damien and lose the company, or you can fire Damien and get $200 million. It is simple arithmetic. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9 o'clock and 20 minutes. Exactly 17 minutes had passed since I walked through the door. I looked at Ellison Grant. "You have a decision to make, Mr. Chairman," I said. "But you need to make it fast. The market's open in 10 minutes. North Point is filing their disclosure in roughly 4 minutes. Lighthouse will pull the offer if they sense hesitation." I held up 3 fingers. "You have 3 minutes," I said. 3 minutes before this story leaves this boardroom and becomes a headline on the Wall Street Journal. 3 minutes before you lose control of the narrative permanently." Ellison Grant looked at the blue folder. He looked at the black kill file containing the evidence of fraud. He looked at the phone where the bank was waiting. He took a deep breath. "I want silence in this room," he said, his voice commanding. But Ellison Damien started. "Silence." Ellison roared. The room fell instantly quiet. 30 seconds. Ellison said, "I want everyone to take 30 seconds to think about their vote. No talking. Just look at the facts." The silence that followed was heavy. It was physical. I stood there listening to the hum of the air conditioning system. It was a low, constant drone that usually went unnoticed, but now sounded like a jet engine. I heard the sound of a pen tapping rhythmically against the glass table. It was Kevin, the young board member. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of nervous energy finding an exit. I saw Trisha Vaughn looking out the window at the gray Chicago sky. She was crying silently. A single tear tracked down her cheek. She was mourning her career, or maybe she was just relieved that the lying was over. I looked at Damien. He was standing at the end of the table, gripping the back of his leather chair. His knuckles were white. I could see the pulse jumping in his neck. It was fast, erratic. He was looking at Robert Sterling, his friend. He was begging him with his eyes, "Save me, help me." But Robert was not looking at Damien. Robert was looking at the picture of his nephew on the screen. The nephew Damien had turned into an accomplice. Robert's jaw was set like stone. The seconds ticked by. Tick, tick, tick. It was the longest 30 seconds of my life. But I knew what was happening in their heads. I knew the calculation they were running. Loyalty is a currency in the corporate world, but it has an exchange rate. And right now, the cost of loyalty to Damien Cole had just become too expensive for anyone to afford. The power was shifting. You could feel it moving across the table like a physical weight sliding from one end to the other. It was sliding away from the man in the bespoke suit who had forgotten the rules. It was sliding toward the woman in the gray suit who had written them. Ellison Grant cleared his throat. The sound broke the spell. He looked up. His face was grim but resolved. "Time is up," he said. Ellison Grant did not sit back down. He stood at the head of the table, tall and imposing, and he looked at the man who had been running his company for 5 years. There was no pity in his eyes. There was only the cold calculation of a man who had almost lost his fortune and had just been handed a lifeline. "We will vote now." Ellison said, his voice deep and resonating against the glass walls. "The motion on the floor is the immediate removal of Damien Cole from the position of Chief Executive Officer and from the Board of Directors. The cause is gross negligence, breach of corporate governance, and actions causing material harm to the financial standing of Harborline Data Works." The room felt like it had been sucked free of oxygen. Damien stood frozen. He looked around the table, desperate to make eye contact with anyone who might save him. "All those in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand," Ellison commanded. Ellison raised his own hand first. It was steady and unshakable. Then Kevin, the young board member representing the pension fund, raised his hand without hesitation. He was looking at the projection screen where the fake fund details were still visible. Then Trisha Vaughn raised her hand. She did not look at Damien. She looked down at her notepad, her face streaked with tears, but her hand was high in the air. She was choosing survival. One by one, the hands went up around the table. Then it came down to Robert Sterling, Damien's golf partner, Damien's oldest ally on the board, the man whose nephew had been dragged into a money laundering scheme. Damien whispered, "Bob, please." Robert looked at Damien. There was a long, painful pause. Then Robert looked at me. He nodded slightly as if acknowledging that I had done him a favor by keeping his family out of prison. Robert raised his hand. It was unanimous. There were 12 people at the table and 12 hands were in the air. Ellison lowered his hand. "The motion carries," he said. "Damien Cole, you are hereby relieved of your duties, effective immediately." Damien looked like he had been slapped. He staggered back slightly, gripping the edge of the conference table. He turned his head slowly to look at me. His face was a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated hatred. "You cannot do this to me," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You are nobody. You are just a risk manager. You are the woman I fired 20 minutes ago. You do not even work here anymore." I sat there calm and composed. I did not raise my voice. I did not smile. "No, Damien," I said softly. "You tried to fire me, but you failed to follow the procedure. You tried to cut corners and you cut your own throat instead. I am not the one who did this to you. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see what you were signing." Ellison stepped forward. He did not give Damien time to launch a counterattack. "Damien, please place your building badge, your company phone, and your laptop on the table," Ellison said. "Security is waiting outside to escort you to your vehicle. Our general counsel will be in touch with your personal lawyer regarding the SEC self-reporting process." Damien looked at the items Ellison was demanding. He looked at the door. He realized that the game was truly over. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his badge. He threw it onto the polished wood table. It slid across the surface and stopped right in front of my folder, the one marked Kill Folder. He did not say another word. He turned around and walked to the door. He pushed it open, and the sounds of the busy office outside rushed in for a brief second before the heavy door clicked shut behind him. He was gone. The room was silent. The tension that had been building for 20 minutes suddenly evaporated, leaving everyone exhausted. Ellison let out a long breath. He looked at the blue Lighthouse equity folder in front of him. Then he looked at me. "Ms. Hayes," he said. I looked up. "Yes, Mr. Chairman." Ellison looked around the table. "We have a vacancy," he said, "and we have a crisis. You are the only person who saw this coming. You are the only person who had a plan to fix it, and you are the only person who currently has the trust of our new investors." He paused. "I would like to propose a motion to appoint Ava Hayes as interim CEO of Harborline Data Works." A murmur of agreement went around the table. Kevin nodded enthusiastically. Robert Sterling looked at me with respect. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. "Thank you, Ellison," I said. "I appreciate the vote of confidence. Truly. But my answer is no." The room went quiet again. Ellison looked surprised. "No?" he asked. "But Eva, you just saved the company. You are the obvious choice." I shook my head. "I am a risk manager, Ellison," I said. "I am a creature of the shadows. I am good at finding cracks in the foundation, and I am good at setting traps for people who try to hide them. But I am not a builder. I am not the person you want on the magazine covers selling a vision. You need someone who can rebuild the trust of the employees and the clients. You do not need a watchdog in the CEO chair. You need a leader." "Then who?" Ellison asked, spreading his hands. I turned and pointed to the back of the room. Sitting in the observer chairs against the wall was a woman named Lena Hart. She was the vice president of operations. She had been silent during the entire meeting, clutching her notebook. Lena was 45 years old, brilliant and pathologically honest. I had watched Damien talk over her in meetings for 3 years. I had watched him steal her ideas and dismiss her concerns. "You need Lena Hart," I said. Lena looked up, startled. Her eyes went wide. "Me," she whispered. "Yes, you," I said firmly. "You know the operations of this company better than anyone, including Damien. You were the one who tried to warn us about the vendor inefficiencies 6 months ago, and you were silenced. You have the respect of the engineers and the sales team. You are clean, Lena. And right now, clean is the most valuable asset this company possesses." I looked back at the board. "If you want to secure the Lighthouse money, I said you need to show them that you are done with the rock stars and the visionaries. You need to show them you are choosing competence and integrity. Lena is the signal you need to send." Ellison looked at Lena. He looked at her file, which was likely somewhere in his memory banks, as the reliable executive who always delivered but never bragged. He nodded slowly. "Ms. Hart," Ellison said, If we were to offer you the position of interim CEO with a mandate to clean up this mess, would you accept? Lena stood up. She was shaking slightly, but she walked to the table. She looked at the empty chair where Damien had stood. She looked at the mess of papers and the projected evidence of fraud. Then she looked at Ellison. "I will not promise you a miracle," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "And I will not promise you a rocket ship to the moon, but I promise you that I will never hide anything from you. I will tell you the truth, even when it is ugly." It was a simple sentence, but after the morning we had just had, it sounded like poetry. Ellison smiled, a genuine tired smile. "I think that is exactly what we need," he said. He called for a vote. It was unanimous again. I watched Lena sit down in the CEO's chair. She looked terrified, but she looked ready. She looked like the future. I closed my laptop. I picked up my leather portfolio. I picked up the black folder and the blue folder. I was done. My work here was finished. The parasite had been removed. The host had been saved. And the antibody was leaving the system. I walked to the door. "Ms. Hayes," Ellison called out. I stopped and turned around. "Where are you going?" he asked. "You still have a job here. You are still the chief risk officer. We need you." I smiled. "I think you will be fine, Ellison," I said. "You have Lena, and you have the money. As for me, I think I'm going to take the rest of the day off. I have a lot of stair climbing to recover from." I pushed the door open. I walked out into the hallway. The office was buzzing with the usual morning noise. Phones were ringing. People were typing. Nobody knew that the world had just changed inside that glass room. Nobody knew that the king was dead and a new queen had been crowned. I walked to the elevator. This time when I pressed the button, the light turned green immediately. My access had been restored. I stepped into the car and pressed the button for the lobby. The door slid shut, cutting off the view of the 52nd floor. I leaned back against the mirrored wall and looked at my reflection. I looked exactly the same as I had 20 minutes ago. Same suit, same hair, same face, but everything was different. I looked directly at the imaginary camera in my mind one last time. If you have listened this far, I assume you enjoy the feeling of watching a bully get hit with a rulebook. I assume you like the moment when the person who thinks they are holding all the cards realizes they forgot to read the instructions on the box. If you do, hit that subscribe button. Because in the corporate world, "They fired me" is often just the opening line of the story. The elevator chimed as it hit the ground floor. The real ending, I said, stepping out into the cold Chicago morning, is simply, "And 20 minutes later, I fired them back." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I want to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you in the office hiding in the break room, or are you driving home after a long shift? Let me know in the comments below, because I love reading about where these stories travel. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story get heard by more people who need a little victory today. Stay safe out there, and remember to always read the fine print.